I realized my family had celebrated Christmas without me when I saw my granddaughter building a snowman in Aspen while my turkey was still warm on the dining room table. I did not scream. I did not drop the phone. I just stood there in my dining room, one hand resting on the back of Daniel's empty chair, staring at the photograph until my screen dimmed and my reflection appeared over my granddaughter's smiling face. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. Sometimes a woman can sit quietly inside her own house for years before she finally understands she has been pushed out of her family, one polite excuse at a time. My name is Helen Whitaker. I was 68 years old that Christmas Eve. Widowed. Retired. Living alone in the same Connecticut house where my husband Richard and I raised our only son, Daniel. I had spent 3 days preparing that dinner. 3 days peeling potatoes, baking pies, wrapping gifts, polishing my mother's silverware, and telling myself not to be dramatic when Daniel did not answer my call that morning. The dining room smelled like rosemary, cinnamon, and roasted turkey. The candles had already burned halfway down. The good china sat untouched beneath the soft glow of white Christmas lights hanging across the front windows. At 68, I still believed Christmas meant family gathered around one table. Maybe that was my mistake. The clock above the fireplace read 7:42 p.m. Daniel was late sometimes. But not this late. Earlier that afternoon, Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, had texted me, running behind. Don't wait for us to eat. That was all.
No explanación. No apology.
Just enough politeness to make me feel unreasonable if I questioned it. Vanessa was very good at that. She never slammed doors. She never shouted. She never said cruel things in a voice other people could easily condemn. She erased people with manners. I opened the photo again. Lily's cheeks were pink from the cold. Her white knit hat had slipped over one eye. Daniel stood behind her smiling, one arm around Vanessa. Snow-covered mountains rose behind them like something from a holiday movie. The caption read, "Family Christmas Getaway." Family. There were 6 photos altogether. Daniel skiing. Vanessa holding hot chocolate beside a massive stone fireplace. Lily asleep under a plaid blanket in what looked like a luxury cabin. The 4th photo showed a dinner table set for 3, with candles, champagne, and a small gingerbread house in the center. I stared at the timestamp. Posted 38 minutes ago. That meant while I had been basting the turkey and reheating the rolls, my family had already been halfway across the country. My chest tightened slowly. Not sharp like panic. Heavy.
Cold.
The kind of feeling that settles into your bones when something finally makes sense after years of confusion. I lowered myself into the chair at the head of the table. The refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. Wind rattled against the living room windows. Upstairs, the guest room television was still playing the Hallmark Christmas movie I had turned on earlier, just to make the house feel less empty while I waited. I looked at the handwritten place cards. Daniel, Vanessa, Lily. Mine sat nearest the kitchen, exactly where it had every Christmas for almost 20 years. Close enough to get up easily when someone needed more gravy, more butter, more napkins, more anything. Useful. Always useful. My fingers trembled as I reached for Daniel's card and turned it over. Blank on the back. A silly thing to notice. But grief does strange things to the mind. It makes you focus on tiny details because the larger truth feels too painful to hold all at once. I remembered Lily's voice from the week before. "Grandma, are you making cinnamon rolls again?" "Of course I am," I told her. "Extra icing this year." Vanessa had taken the phone afterward. "We'll see you Christmas Eve, Helen," she said warmly. Lily can't stop talking about it. Warmly. That was the dangerous thing about Vanessa. She always sounded kind. I stood and walked toward the front window. Snow had started falling outside, covering the quiet street in white. Across the road, my neighbor's house glowed with soft golden light. Through their curtains, I could see people gathered around a table, laughing together. For a moment, I pressed my hand against the cold glass and tried not to cry. Not because they had gone to Aspen without me. That hurt, yes. But what hurt more was realizing this had not happened suddenly. This was only the first time I had caught them clearly. My phone buzzed on the table. I turned too quickly. Hope rose before I could stop it. Maybe Daniel had called. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe they were coming after all. But it was only a text. Sorry, Mom. Vanessa booked this months ago. I thought she told you. We'll celebrate when we get back. I read it 3 times. No real apology lived inside those words. Just convenience. Just distance. I looked at the turkey in front of me, golden brown exactly the way Daniel liked it. When he was little, he used to sneak pieces from the carving board before dinner started. Richard would laugh and pretend not to notice. For 32 years, this house had been loud on Christmas Eve. Music playing, wrapping paper everywhere. Someone always burning the dinner rolls. Now all I could hear was the ticking clock above the fireplace, counting seconds inside a house that suddenly felt too large for one person. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. The wine had gone warm. Outside, snow continued falling gently while my family toasted champagne somewhere in the mountains without me. And for the first time in my life, I stopped asking myself whether I was being too sensitive. Because mothers know when they have been forgotten. But deep down, they also know when they have been left behind on purpose.
I did not clean the table that night.
The plates stayed exactly where they were long after midnight, untouched beneath the dim glow of Christmas lights. The gravy cooled in the silver boat until a thin skin formed across the top. The rolls hardened under the linen towel. The cranberry sauce sat in a crystal bowl Richard had bought me for our 25th anniversary. I could not bring myself to move anything. Some part of me felt that if I left the table set, the truth had not fully happened yet. I fell asleep in the armchair beside the fireplace sometime after 1 a.m, with a blanket over my lap and the television still playing old holiday movies to an empty room. When I opened my eyes again, pale winter sunlight had filled the living room. The Christmas tree stood quietly in the corner. Wrapped gifts were still arranged neatly underneath it. Lily's presents sat in a red bag with tissue paper I had curled by hand. Daniel's favorite bourbon waited beside it. Vanessa's cashmere scarf lay inside a white box tied with silver ribbon. I had bought that scarf in November during a sale at Bloomingdale's. Vanessa once mentioned she liked soft neutrals. I remembered things like that. I always remembered. The house felt colder in the daylight. Not physically colder. Emotionally colder. Like something invisible had finally left the room after years of lingering. In the dining room, the turkey had dried out overnight. The mashed potatoes had formed a crust around the edges of the bowl. One of the candles had burned completely down and hardened into wax across the silver tray beneath it. I began clearing dishes slowly, one plate at a time. The sound of silverware clinking against porcelain echoed through the kitchen. Strange how loud ordinary things become when nobody is there talking over them. I wrapped leftovers in plastic containers I already knew would never be eaten. I stacked them inside the refrigerator, beside medication bottles, half a carton of eggs, and the little glass jar of blackberry jam Lily liked with toast. Years ago, the morning after Christmas meant noise in this house. Daniel sleeping late upstairs, wrapping paper stuffed into trash bags. Richard making coffee too strong. Lily running around in pajamas asking for pancakes. Even after Richard passed away 6 years ago, I held on to those traditions because they made the house feel alive. But standing in the quiet kitchen that morning, I realized I had been preserving memories for people who had already moved on from them. My phone buzzed twice while I washed dishes. 2 more photos from Vanessa's social media account. In one picture, Daniel and Lily sat beside a giant stone fireplace holding mugs of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. In another, Vanessa stood in front of a decorated ski lodge, wearing a white coat and smiling like someone living a perfect life. Hundreds of comments filled the post. Beautiful family. Christmas goals. You all look so happy. Then I noticed one detail that made my stomach sink. Lily was wearing the red sweater I had mailed her 2 weeks earlier. She had opened my gift there, in Colorado, without me. I dried my hands carefully and sat at the kitchen counter. For a moment, I tried convincing myself there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe Vanessa truly thought Daniel had told me. Maybe plans changed suddenly. Maybe Lily had packed the sweater by accident. But deep down, I already knew better. Because this feeling was familiar. Not the vacation itself. The pattern. Last Thanksgiving, dinner had suddenly been moved to Vanessa's sister's house 2 hours before it started. Daniel claimed he forgot to call me. The summer before that, Lily's piano recital had accidentally been scheduled during the exact weekend Vanessa knew I would be visiting my sister in Vermont. 2 years earlier, Vanessa told me Lily's birthday party would be just kids this year. Later, I saw photos of both sets of grandparents from Vanessa's side standing around the cake. Every time, there was an explanation, a reason, a soft voice, a phrase like, "Oh, Helen, I thought Daniel told you." Something small enough to make me question my own instincts. I walked into the hallway and stopped in front of the family photos. Christmases, birthdays, beach vacations. In the older pictures, Daniel always stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his cheek pressed against mine. My boy. But over time, Vanessa had slowly positioned herself in the center of every frame. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough that I somehow ended up closer to the edge. One photo was from Lily's school Christmas concert 3 years earlier. Vanessa and Daniel smiled proudly in the middle while I stood partially hidden near the side, holding everyone's coats. At the time, I had not thought much about it. Now I could not stop seeing it. My phone rang suddenly. For one foolish second, I thought it might be Daniel. But it was Carol, my neighbor from 3 houses down. "Helen," she said gently. "I made coffee. I have leftover pie. Come over for a little while." I almost said no out of habit. Then I looked around the silent house and realized something that frightened me more than loneliness itself. I had spent so many years waiting for my family to include me that I had quietly stopped living my own life. "I'll come," I said. My voice sounded strange. Small, but steady. Carol lived in a pale blue colonial with white shutters and a front porch that always smelled faintly like coffee and cinnamon candles. Her husband passed away almost 10 years ago, but somehow she had learned how to keep living afterward. I used to admire that about her, without fully understanding it. That afternoon, I carried a pecan pie across the street through 6 inches of fresh snow while icy wind pushed against my coat. Carol opened the door before I even knocked. "I saw your kitchen light on this morning," she said softly, stepping aside. "I figured you might not want to be alone." Her house felt warm in the way mine no longer did. Not because of the temperature, because someone still lived inside it emotionally. Christmas music played quietly from a radio near the fireplace while a football game flickered silently on the television. A knitted blanket lay folded across the couch beside an open crossword puzzle. Reading glasses rested on the arm of a chair. Nothing looked perfect, but everything felt peaceful. "Coffee?" she asked. I nodded and removed my gloves slowly. For a few minutes, we sat at her kitchen table talking about harmless things. The weather. Her grandson getting accepted into college. The grocery store running out of eggnog before Christmas Eve. I realized she was giving me time to speak first if I wanted to. That kindness nearly broke me more than pity would have. Finally, she looked at me over the rim of her mug. "I saw Vanessa's vacation photos online," she said gently. "I was surprised you weren't with them." I stared down into my cup. Apparently everyone assumed somebody told me. Carol stayed quiet for a moment too long. Long enough for me to notice. "What?" I asked. She hesitated. "Helen, I don't think this trip was spontaneous." Something inside my chest tightened again. "What do you mean?" Carol set her mug down carefully. "Vanessa mentioned Aspen weeks ago at the neighborhood charity luncheon. She was talking to Melissa Parker about ski resorts." I felt suddenly cold despite the heat inside the kitchen. "Did she mention me?" Carol's expression shifted. Uncomfortable. Regretful. Not directly. That answer told me enough already, but she continued. "Melissa asked whether the whole family was going. Vanessa laughed and said holiday trips are easier, without too many obligations weighing people down." I did not respond. I could not, because I knew exactly what those words meant even though my name had never been spoken aloud. Extra baggage. Obligations. Wait. That was how Vanessa saw me now. Not family. Not Daniel's mother. Not Lily's grandmother. Just another responsibility complicating the polished life she wanted to present to the world. Carol reached across the table and touched my hand gently. I almost called you after I heard it, she admitted. But I convinced myself maybe I misunderstood. I swallowed hard. No, I said. You understood perfectly. Outside her kitchen window, snow drifted softly across the neighborhood while children somewhere nearby laughed and threw snowballs. Normal life carried on so casually while my entire understanding of my family rearranged itself inside my head. I thought back to dozens of tiny moments over the past few years. Vanessa insisting they spend holidays at resorts because hosting is stressful. Daniel becoming strangely distracted whenever I asked about plans. Lily accidentally mentioning vacations I had never heard about, even of photographs online. So many pictures labeled family time, where I no longer appeared at all. The realization settled over me slowly and painfully. Vanessa had not removed me from one Christmas dinner. She had been editing me out of their lives piece by piece for years. And somehow I had spent all that time apologizing for noticing it. Carol stood to refill our coffee cups. There's something else, she said carefully. I looked up. She asked me a strange question at that luncheon. What question? Carol hesitated again. She asked whether I thought you would ever sell your house. She said it must be hard for you, all those stairs, the yard, the taxes. She made it sound like concern. My fingers tightened around the napkin in my lap. She said that. Carol nodded. She said, Daniel worries you're becoming overwhelmed. Then she laughed and said, of course Helen is sentimental about that old place. That old place. My home. The house Richard and I had bought when Daniel was 4 years old. The house where every doorframe held a memory. The house I had paid taxes on alone since Richard died, because he wanted me to be safe there. I remembered Vanessa, 6 months earlier, standing in my kitchen with her arms folded. Helen, have you ever thought about something smaller? A condo, maybe? Less upkeep.
I had smiled then.
I had said, maybe someday. I had not heard the hunger inside the question. Now I did. Carol watched my face. I'm sorry, she said. I shook my head. Don't be. I needed to know. And that was true. Because for the first time since seeing those photos, something inside me shifted quietly. The sadness remained. The loneliness remained. But underneath both of them, another feeling began taking shape.
Clarity. Cold and undeniable.
And once a woman finally sees the truth clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee it again. After leaving Carol's house, I drove aimlessly through town for nearly an hour. Every street looked like a postcard. Wreaths hanging from doors. Inflatable snowmen in front yards. Families carrying shopping bags through the cold evening air. The whole town seemed wrapped in warmth and celebration, while I sat alone at red lights feeling like someone who had quietly disappeared without anyone noticing. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had already darkened. My house stood still and silent beneath a thin layer of fresh snow. For years, I had thought silence meant peace. That night, it felt more like abandonment. I carried my purse inside and stopped in the hallway beside the family photographs. This time, I did not look away quickly. I studied them carefully, almost like evidence. There was one from Daniel's 40th birthday dinner 2 years earlier. Vanessa stood beside him, smiling brightly, while I sat at the far corner of the table, half hidden behind a flower arrangement. Another from Lily's dance recital. Vanessa and Daniel kneeling proudly beside her backstage, while I stood farther back holding everyone's coats and purses. I realized something painful then. I had slowly accepted becoming useful instead of important. Somewhere along the way, my role had shifted. Mother became helper. Grandmother became babysitter. Holiday cook. Emergency contact. Gift buyer. The woman who handled things quietly in the background while someone else took center stage in the family I helped build. I walked upstairs and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed where I kept old Christmas decorations and photo albums. Dust rose softly into the air as I lifted out a thick album wrapped in faded red cloth. Daniel used to love looking through these when he was younger. Back when he still sat beside me on the couch during snowstorms and asked me to tell stories about his childhood. I opened the album slowly. There he was at age 6, wearing striped pajamas beside a crooked Christmas tree we could barely afford that year. There he was at 12, holding the first bicycle his father saved 6 months to buy him. There he was at 17, standing in front of the house in his graduation gown while Richard tried not to cry. Every photo carried memories of sacrifice nobody talks about later. The extra shifts at the diner when money was tight. Selling my mother's bracelet after Richard got laid off one winter. Canceling vacations so Daniel could attend better summer programs and private tutoring. Mothers erase pieces of themselves so their children can grow larger. They do it willingly, quietly, and most of the time, nobody remembers the cost afterward. I turned another page and froze at a photograph from Daniel's wedding day. Vanessa looked beautiful in her ivory gown standing between Daniel and me outside the church. At the time, I had genuinely loved her. She was polished, educated, charming in that careful, effortless way some women are. During the reception, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I feel lucky to be joining this family." I had believed her completely. Looking at that photo now, I noticed something else. Even then, Daniel's attention belonged entirely to Vanessa. Every glance, every smile. I had mistaken that for love growing naturally after marriage. But maybe it had also been the beginning of something else. A slow transfer of loyalty so gradual I never noticed it happening until there was almost nothing left for me. Beside the album, inside the cedar chest, was a blue folder tied with an old rubber band. Richard's handwriting was on the front. House papers. Insurance. Helen. My throat tightened. I had not opened that folder in years. Inside were copies of the deed, our mortgage payoff letter, property tax statements, and a handwritten note from Richard. "Helen, if anything happens to me, this house is yours. Do not let anyone make you feel like a guest in what we built together." I sat very still. The paper trembled in my hands. Richard had known me too well. He knew I would avoid conflict. He knew I would give too much. He knew I might mistake pressure for concern if it came from someone I loved. My phone buzzed beside me on the bed. Another social media notification. Vanessa had uploaded a video from Aspen. Lily laughing while roasting marshmallows beside an outdoor fire pit. Daniel pouring champagne into crystal glasses while snow fell around them. At one point, Vanessa's voice came through the background. "This is exactly the peaceful Christmas we needed." Peaceful. The word echoed inside my mind long after the video ended, because suddenly I understood something clearly. Vanessa did not see me as family anymore. She saw me as disruption, obligation, noise. An aging mother-in-law whose presence complicated the perfect image she wanted to create. I set the phone down and looked again at Richard's note. "Do not let anyone make you feel like a guest in what we built together." For the first time since Christmas Eve, I did not cry. I folded the note carefully and placed it back inside the folder. Then I sat in the quiet bedroom listening to the wind outside while a strange calm settled over me. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. Just awareness. Clear and sharp. The kind that changes a person permanently once it arrives. The day after Christmas, I stopped waiting for Daniel to call. That realization came quietly while I stood in my kitchen pouring coffee into a mug that suddenly felt too large for my hands. For years, my mornings had revolved around checking my phone first. Family group messages. Photos from Lily's school activities. Last-minute invitations that always sounded casual enough to make exclusion feel accidental. But that morning, I left my phone face down on the counter while snow drifted softly outside the kitchen window. It was the first small thing I had done differently in years. Around noon, I decided to take down some Christmas decorations early. Usually I waited until New Year's Day because Daniel loved coming over as a child to help pack ornaments away. He used to wrap the fragile glass ones in newspaper so carefully while Richard teased him for acting like a museum curator. But traditions lose their meaning when only one person is still carrying them. I climbed carefully onto the small step stool near the fireplace and reached for the garland hanging across the mantel. Halfway through removing it, my phone rang upstairs in the bedroom. My heart reacted before my mind could stop it. Even after everything, some part of me still hoped. I climbed down slowly and walked upstairs. Daniel's name lit across the screen. I stared at it for 2 rings before answering. Mum. His voice sounded distracted. Wind and muffled laughter filled the background.
The
Silence settled briefly between us. I waited for an apology that never came. "We're heading to dinner soon," he said. "I just wanted to check in."
check in.
Like I was a neighbor recovering from the flu instead of his mother spending Christmas alone for the first time in nearly 4 decades.
All fine, he replied quietly.
"Good," he answered too quickly. "Vanessa was worried you might be upset." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else he said. Not I was worried. Vanessa was worried. Even now, every emotional bridge between Daniel and me passed through her first. "Lily loves the sweater you sent," he continued.
She
"Has barely taken it off." I closed my eyes briefly. I saw the pictures. Another silence followed. Uncomfortable this time. Then Daniel cleared his throat softly. "Mom, you know how complicated holiday scheduling can get." There it was. The careful explanation. The polished excuse designed to smooth over hurt without ever acknowledging it directly. I looked around my bedroom while he spoke. The framed wedding photo still sat on my dresser beside an old silver clock. Richard's winter coat still hung untouched inside the closet because some losses become part of the walls themselves after enough years. "Daniel," I said slowly, "did you know about this trip before Christmas Eve?" He hesitated just long enough. Vanessa handled most of the planning. I almost laughed then, though nothing felt funny anymore, because that was his answer to everything lately. Vanessa handled it. Vanessa forgot. Vanessa planned it months ago. Somewhere along the line, my son had slowly surrendered ownership of his own decisions. "Mom," he asked carefully, "you still there?" "Yes," I replied softly. "I'm here." But even as I said the words, I realized something painful. I had been emotionally standing in the same place for years while Daniel continued walking farther away, without ever fully noticing the distance growing between us. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "When we get back, maybe we should talk about the house." My hand tightened around the phone. "The house. Just practical things," he said quickly. "You're alone there. It's a lot. Vanessa found a few really nice condos closer to us. It might make life easier." Closer to us. Not with us. Closer. Close enough to be convenient. Far enough not to disturb. I thought of Richard's note inside the blue folder. "I'm not discussing my house over the phone while you're on vacation," I said. Daniel went quiet. "I didn't mean." "I know what you meant."
My voice was calm.
That surprised both of us. We ended the conversation politely. He said they would visit after New Year's. I told him to enjoy the rest of the trip. Neither of us mentioned Christmas dinner again. After hanging up, I sat quietly at the edge of my bed with the phone, resting in my lap. Outside, snow slid gently from the roof in soft, heavy clumps. Somewhere downstairs, the old grandfather clock chimed 3 times through the empty house. For the first time since all of this began, I stopped feeling desperate to fix things immediately. Because clarity changes the shape of grief. Once you finally understand that someone has been choosing distance from you over and over again, sadness slowly hardens into something calmer. Something steadier. Not revenge. Not anger. Just the quiet beginning of emotional detachment. And deep down, I think mothers know exactly when that moment arrives. The house felt different after that phone call. Not emptier. Strangely clearer. As if someone had finally opened a curtain I had been staring through for years without realizing how dark the room had become. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and made breakfast for only myself for the first time in a very long while. 2 eggs. Toast with blackberry jam. Coffee in the blue ceramic mug Richard bought during a trip to Maine nearly 20 years earlier. Usually, even when nobody visited, I still cooked as though someone might arrive unexpectedly. Extra bacon, extra coffee, extra everything. Mothers build habits around hope. But that morning, I placed one plate on the kitchen table and sat down quietly without feeling guilty about it. Snow covered the backyard in smooth, untouched layers while pale winter light crept across the floorboards. I ate in silence and realized I could not remember the last time I had actually listened to my own thoughts without worrying about everyone else first. Around 10 o'clock, I began organizing the kitchen cabinets. It was something small, but it kept my hands busy while my mind sorted through years of memories I had ignored. I found old plastic containers Vanessa once complained about during Thanksgiving dinner. "Helen, you really should switch to glass containers," she had said with a soft laugh while rearranging my refrigerator without asking. "Plastic absorbs odors." At the time, Daniel chuckled along with her while I stood there smiling politely in my own kitchen. Another memory surfaced while I stacked coffee mugs onto the counter. Lily's 8th birthday party last spring. Vanessa had moved my seat at the restaurant without explanation because, according to her, the photographer needed better lighting near the center of the table. I ended up sitting beside the bathrooms while the family photos were taken at the opposite end. I remembered pretending not to notice. Pretending had become second nature to me. By noon, the kitchen looked cleaner than it had in years.
Organized.
Quiet. Controlled. I realized something uncomfortable then. I had spent so much energy trying to remain welcome in Daniel's life that I had slowly surrendered comfort inside my own home. Every visit from Vanessa carried tiny adjustments. Different recipes because Vanessa preferred everything organic. Rearranged furniture because Lily needed more open space. Softer music. Earlier dinners. Smaller portions. Less of me. Always less of me. My phone buzzed while I wiped down the counters. Another message from the family group chat. Vanessa had uploaded photos from a sleigh ride through the mountains. Lily looked beautiful wrapped in scarves and blankets beside Daniel. Underneath the photos, Vanessa typed, "Making magical memories before the year ends." I stared at the sentence for a long moment. Then, without overthinking it, I muted the conversation completely. My thumb hovered above the screen afterward while an unexpected calm spread through me.
No anger. No dramatic gesture.
Just silence. Intentional silence. It felt strangely powerful. Later that afternoon, I carried the blue folder downstairs and spread the papers across the kitchen table. Property tax records. Insurance statements. Richard's will. Old bank correspondence. The house deed. I was not studying them because I expected a fight. I was studying them because I had spent too many years assuming everything would always stay the same. Snow drifted softly outside the window while I sorted documents into separate piles. Things to keep. Things to review. Things to bring to Martin Bell when I met him the following week. By evening, I had organized most of it. The blue folder remained on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker.
Not.
Because it was important. Because I intended to continue working through it the next morning. At the time, it never occurred to me that anyone else would pay attention to it. At 4 o'clock, Carol stopped by with homemade soup and stayed for an hour talking about gardening plans for spring. At one point, she laughed so hard about something silly involving her cat that I caught myself laughing too. Really laughing. Not the polite, careful kind I used around Vanessa. Genuine laughter that filled the room naturally without anyone monitoring the mood. After Carol left, I stood alone in the kitchen holding the empty soup bowl and realized how long it had been since I felt relaxed inside my own home. That realization hurt more than Christmas itself, because suddenly I understood the full truth. Vanessa had not only separated me from my family gatherings. Over time, she had trained me to feel like a guest in my own life. But standing there in the quiet warmth of my kitchen while snow drifted softly beyond the windows, another realization followed close behind it. I did not have to keep accepting that role anymore. Daniel and Vanessa returned from Aspen 3 days before New Year's Eve. I knew because the family group chat suddenly became active again with photos of luggage at the airport and complaints about delayed flights. I did not respond to any of it. In the past, I would have replied immediately with heart emojis and questions about the trip. This time, I simply placed my phone back on the kitchen counter and continued watering the plants near the living room window. The silence between us had started changing shape. It no longer felt desperate. It felt observant. On the afternoon of December 30th, Daniel called and asked if they could stop by the next evening before dinner. "Lily wants to give you something she bought in Aspen," he said. His voice sounded cautious, almost formal. "Of course," I replied calmly. The next evening, snow covered the sidewalks in gray slush while icy rain tapped softly against the windows. I lit the fireplace an hour before they arrived, more out of habit than excitement. At exactly 6:15, headlights swept across the front yard. A moment later, the front door opened and cold air rushed into the hallway along with Lily's excited voice. "Grandma." She ran toward me in her little winter boots. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of peppermint shampoo and cold winter air. Behind her, Vanessa stepped inside, wearing a cream-colored wool coat and expensive leather gloves. "Helen," she said warmly, leaning in for a quick, careful hug that barely touched me. "Your house looks beautiful." Daniel followed, carrying shopping bags and overnight luggage they had not unpacked yet. He looked tired, older somehow. "Hi, Mom," he said softly before kissing my cheek. For a while, everything appeared normal. Lily showed me a snow globe she bought from a gift shop in Aspen while Daniel added logs to the fireplace. Vanessa moved through my kitchen with practiced familiarity, opening cabinets and rearranging wine glasses while complimenting the Christmas decorations I had already started taking down. "I cannot believe the holidays are almost over," she said lightly while pouring herself sparkling water. "This season went by so fast." I watched her carefully from across the room. Same polished smile, same gentle voice. If someone met her for the first time, they would think she was thoughtful and charming. Maybe that was why I had questioned myself for so long instead of questioning her. We sat down in the living room after dinner while snow tapped softly against the windows outside. Lily curled beside me under a blanket while Daniel scrolled through work emails on his phone. Vanessa sat across from us discussing ski conditions and mountain resorts like the past week had been completely ordinary. Then Lily looked up suddenly and smiled at me innocently. "Mommy said Aspen was going to be way more peaceful without all the family drama," she announced cheerfully. The room froze. Daniel lowered his phone slowly. Vanessa's smile disappeared for half a second before returning too quickly. "Lily," she said sharply, "that is enough. But children tell the truth adults work very hard to hide." Lily looked confused by the tension immediately filling the room. "What?" she asked quietly.
You said.
"Grandma gets sad during holidays and it changes everybody's mood." Daniel stared at Vanessa now with an expression I had not seen in years.
Not anger exactly.
Recognition. Like someone finally hearing words clearly after listening through static for a very long time. Vanessa laughed softly.
Too softly.
"Honey, that is not what I meant," she replied while smoothing invisible wrinkles from her sweater. "You know children misunderstand things sometimes." Nobody answered her immediately. The fire crackled quietly between us while icy rain streaked against the windows outside. I sat perfectly still beside Lily, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. For once, I did not rush to smooth over discomfort. I did not rescue Vanessa from the silence she created. Daniel looked at me briefly, then away again. Shame flickered across his face, so quickly it almost hurt to witness. Because deep down, I think he finally understood something painful. Children do not invent these ideas on their own. They absorb them slowly from conversations whispered in kitchens and car rides and bedrooms when adults assume nobody is listening. Then Vanessa stood abruptly. "I need to use the restroom," she said. But she walked toward the kitchen first, not the bathroom. I noticed because I had learned to notice. A moment later, I heard the soft scrape of paper. When she returned, her face was smooth again. Too smooth. After they left, I went into the kitchen. The blue folder was still sitting on the kitchen counter exactly where I'd left it while organizing paperwork. Nothing appeared missing. No papers had been moved dramatically. No drawers had been opened. But the folder itself was no longer aligned with the stack beside it. The rubber band wrapped around it differently than before. Tiny things. The kind of things most people never notice. I noticed because the folder had occupied my thoughts all week. And because women who spend years being quietly excluded become unusually observant. Richard's handwritten note was still inside. The deed copies were still there. Nothing had been taken. Yet somehow I knew someone had looked. Not because of evidence, because of instinct. The same instinct I had ignored for years whenever Vanessa smiled and told me not to worry. After they left that night, the house felt strangely calm. Not because anything had been resolved. Nothing had. But for the first time in years, the The truth no longer lived only inside my head. Daniel had heard it too. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not enough yet. But the illusion had cracked. And once cracks appear, they spread quietly through everything. The next morning, I woke before dawn and sat beside the living room window with a blanket over my knees, watching snowplows move slowly down the street. The Christmas tree lights still glowed softly in the corner, even though most of the ornaments had already been packed away. Usually the days between Christmas and New Year's made me sad. This year felt different. Lighter somehow. Not happy. Just honest. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. Thank you again for dinner. Lily adores spending time with you. Sorry if things felt awkward last night. Kids say random things sometimes. I read the message twice before placing the phone face down on the coffee table.
No apology. No acknowledgement.
Just another attempt to smooth reality into something easier to manage. A year ago, I would have responded immediately. No worries at all. I completely understand. Children are funny. But that morning I said nothing. Silence can reveal more than arguments ever do. By afternoon, another message arrived. This time from Daniel. Mom, can we meet for coffee tomorrow? Just us. I stared at those words for a long moment. Just us. It had been years since my son asked to see me alone without Vanessa organizing the plans first. Of course, I replied simply. The next day, we met at a small coffee shop downtown near the bookstore Daniel used to love visiting as a teenager. Snow melted slowly along the sidewalks, while gray clouds hung low over the town. Daniel was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, turning a paper coffee cup nervously between his hands. He looked exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from work. The kind that comes from replaying uncomfortable memories after finally allowing yourself to see
them.
Hi, Mom, he said quietly as I sat across from him. For a few moments, neither of us spoke much. The espresso machine hissed behind the counter while soft jazz played through the speakers overhead. Twice, he started speaking and stopped. Twice, he looked toward the window before trying again. Finally, he rubbed both hands across his face. Mom, he hesitated. The thing Lily said, his voice trailed off. I've heard Vanessa say things like that before. I remained quiet. Not exactly those words. But he swallowed. The same idea. Family gatherings being easier. Less stressful. More peaceful. Less complicated. I think I convinced myself she didn't mean you. He looked down at his coffee. Maybe because admitting she meant you would have required me to do something about it. That hurt. Not because it surprised me. Because it confirmed what I had feared for years. Daniel had seen pieces of the truth. He simply lacked the courage to look at all of it. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression somewhere between guilt and confusion. Did Vanessa really make you feel unwanted? He asked carefully. The question settled heavily between us. Not because I did not know the answer. Because after all these years, he was finally asking it. I stirred cream slowly into my coffee before answering. I think people reveal their feelings through patterns, not single moments. Daniel looked down at the table immediately. He understood more than he wanted to admit. I never meant for you to spend Christmas alone, he said quietly. I know, I replied. And strangely enough, I meant it. That was the tragedy of it all. Daniel had not become cruel. He had simply become passive. And passive people often allow the loudest personality around them to shape reality over time. Lily should not have said those things, he added. I looked out the window at snow sliding slowly from parked cars along the street. Children repeat what becomes normal to them, I answered softly. Daniel fell silent after that. Long enough that I could almost hear him replaying years of small moments inside his head the same way I had. Missed holidays. Rearranged plans. Last minute. Cancellations. Tiny exclusions stacked together, so gradually they became invisible until suddenly they were not. Then he said something that changed the air between us. Vanessa thinks you should sell the house. I kept my face still. I know. His eyes lifted. You know. She has been saying it in different ways for years. Daniel rubbed his forehead. She says it's practical. That you're alone. That the house will become too much. That it would help everyone if things were settled before there's an emergency. Help everyone. There it was. The soft language around greed. What do you think? I asked. He did not answer immediately. The old Daniel would have answered quickly, defensively, with Vanessa's words already prepared in his mouth. This Daniel stared into his coffee. I think I let her talk me into seeing your life as a problem to manage. That hurt, but it was honest. I nodded. I am not a problem, Daniel. I know. His voice cracked slightly. And the house is not available for anyone else's plans, I said. He swallowed. I understand. When we stood to leave, Daniel hugged me longer than usual in the cold parking lot. I am sorry, Mom, he whispered quietly against my shoulder.
Real sorrow this time.
Not polished. Not convenient. I closed my eyes briefly and hugged him back, but something inside me remained careful now. Because apologies matter, but awareness matters more. And deep down, I knew the story was not really about one Christmas vacation anymore. It was about years of emotional erosion that had finally become impossible for any of us to ignore. In January, I met with Martin Bell. His office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, above a bakery that smelled like butter and coffee. Richard had used Martin for everything after his first heart scare 15 years earlier. Wills, medical directives, insurance papers. The kind of documents people avoid because they make ordinary life feel fragile. Martin was older now, with silver hair and careful hands. When I stepped into his office, he greeted me with a kind of respect that nearly made me emotional. Helen, he said, it's good to see you. I only wish Richard were here, too. So do I replied. We sat across from each other at a polished wooden desk. I placed the blue folder in front of him. I need to understand what is mine, I said. And I need to make sure it stays that way. Martin did not look surprised. That unsettled me. He opened the folder and reviewed the papers carefully.
The deed.
The mortgage payoff. Insurance. Richard's will. My own outdated will from years earlier. Then he looked at me over his glasses. Has anyone pressured you to sell? The question was too direct. I folded my hands in my lap. Not openly. He nodded as though he understood that distinction well. Has anyone asked to be added to the deed? No. Has anyone asked you to sign anything? Not yet.
He paused.
Then let's make sure they never get the chance quietly. Martin spent most of that first meeting reviewing my existing documents. We did not finish everything that day. Estate planning rarely works that way. Instead, he created a list. Documents needing updates. Beneficiaries needing review. Medical directives that should be revised. Property protections we could strengthen. We'll do this properly, he told me. Not quickly. Over the next 2 weeks, we met twice more. Each appointment felt strangely emotional. Not because of legal paperwork, because every document forced me to think about aging in practical terms. Hospital rooms. Emergencies. Decisions made when you can no longer speak for yourself. During our second meeting, Martin asked who I wanted listed as secondary medical power of attorney. My pen stopped moving. Years ago, the answer would have been immediate. Daniel. Only Daniel. Now, the question sat heavily in front of me. Martin waited patiently. Finally, I whispered, Carol. Saying her name hurt more than I expected. Not because I trusted Carol more. Because for the first time in my life, I was acknowledging that trust and love are not always the same thing. I sat in my car afterward for nearly 20 minutes. Richard's old note rested inside the folder on the passenger seat. Do not let anyone make you feel like a guest in what we built together. I read those words 3 times before starting the engine. Then I cried.
Not.
Because I was afraid. Because accepting reality often hurts more than discovering it. By the end of January, Martin had updated the necessary documents. The house was fully mine. Richard had left it to me outright. No shared ownership. No hidden claim. No obligation to Daniel. My medical directives now named Daniel first, but Carol second. My financial papers required independent legal review before any major property decision. My will was updated. My bank access was cleaned up. Old emergency contacts were revised. It sounded cold, legal, but to me it felt like breathing. That evening, Vanessa called. She had not called me directly in months. Helen, she said brightly. Daniel mentioned you met with an attorney. Is everything all right? There it was. Too quick. Too interested. I'm just updating my records, I said. Oh, of course. That's wise. A small pause. We should all sit down sometime and discuss future plans. You know, so nobody is surprised. Nobody. Meaning her. I looked toward Richard's reading glasses still resting on the side table. My future plans are not a group project, Vanessa. Silence. Only 2 seconds. But enough. Then she laughed lightly. Of course.
I didn't mean it that way.
I know. I did not soften the words. After we hung up, I stood in the living room while sleet tapped against the windows. The house was quiet around me. The same quiet as before. But I was not the same woman standing inside it. The pressure did not stop after that. It changed shape. That was Vanessa's talent. When one door closed, she found a window and called it concern. In February, she sent me an email with a subject line. Just something to think about. Inside were links to 3 senior communities within 20 minutes of Daniel's house. Beautiful places. Landscaped grounds. Fitness classes. Dining rooms with chandeliers. Women my age smiling in staged photographs, holding coffee cups as if aging were simply a lifestyle choice. Her message read, Helen, no pressure at all. I just thought these looked lovely. It might be comforting to be around people your own age. People your own age. I closed the email without replying. In March, Daniel brought it up. Over the phone. Mom, Vanessa didn't mean anything by those links. I didn't say she did. She's just trying to help. Is she? A pause. Daniel sighed. I don't want to argue. Neither do I. But for the first time, I did not rescue him from the discomfort. In April, the family invited me to dinner at their house. Lily was spending the night with a friend. That detail told me everything. Vanessa wanted a conversation without small ears in the room. Their dining room looked like a magazine. White plates. Linen napkins. Fresh tulips.
No clutter. No worms.
Everything selected, arranged, controlled. Vanessa served salmon and roasted asparagus. Daniel barely ate. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa placed her fork down. Helen, she began softly, I hope you know we care about you. I looked at her. That sounds like the beginning of something unpleasant. Daniel shifted in his chair. Mom. Vanessa smiled. No, it's all right. I understand this is sensitive. There it was again, positioning herself as reasonable before saying something unreasonable. She continued, We've all been through a lot since Richard passed. And I think sometimes grief makes people hold on to things that may not be serving them anymore. My house serves me fine. It's a large property. I know. I clean it. The stairs, I climb them. The taxes, I pay them. Daniel looked at his plate. Vanessa's smile tightened. No one is attacking you. I didn't say anyone was. The room became very still. Then Daniel spoke carefully. We just think it might be smart to explore options before there's a crisis. I turned to him. What crisis? He blinked. Well, none right now. Then why are we having a crisis conversation? Vanessa exhaled softly through her nose. Helen, you're making this harder than it needs to be. I folded my napkin in my lap.
No.
I'm making it honest. For the first time that evening, her mask slipped. Only slightly. A flash of irritation crossed her face. Then it was gone.
Fine, she said.
Let's be honest. Daniel worries constantly. Lily worries. I worry. That house is too much for one person. And frankly, it would be easier for everyone if decisions were made before. Emotions make them impossible. Easier for everyone. There it was again. Not safer for me. Not better for me. Easier for everyone. I reached into my purse and removed a copy of the updated legal summary Martin had prepared. Not the full documents. Just enough. I placed it on the table. I have updated my estate plan, medical directives, and property protections. The house will not be sold unless I choose to sell it. No decisions will be made for me while I am capable of making them myself. Daniel stared at the paper. Vanessa did too. Her face went pale in a quiet, controlled way. Helen, Daniel said slowly, why would you think we'd try to make decisions for you? I looked at him. I didn't say you would. Silence. That was the thing about truth. You could set it gently on a table and still hear it crack something. Vanessa recovered first. Well, she said, lifting her water glass. I'm glad you feel protected. So am I. After that, dinner became painfully polite. Weather, work, Lily's school. Nothing real. But something had changed. Vanessa now knew I was watching. Daniel knew I was no longer waiting quietly at the edge of my own life. And I knew that whatever came next, I would not meet it empty-handed. Summer came slowly that year. The snow melted from the edges of the driveway. The maple tree in the front yard began to bud. The hydrangeas along the back fence pushed small green leaves through the mulch. For the first time in years, I made plans that did not depend on Daniel. On Wednesdays, I volunteered at the church pantry. On Fridays, Carol and I went to a book club at the library, where women with silver hair and sharp opinions argued about novels over store-bought cookies. On Sundays, I cooked dinner for myself and sometimes invited people who actually wanted to sit at my table. The house changed. Not because I renovated it, because I stopped treating it like a waiting room. I moved the armchair closer to the front window. I bought yellow curtains for the kitchen because Richard always said yellow made mornings kinder. I replaced the cracked porch planter Vanessa once called depressing and filled it with red geraniums. Small things. But every small thing said the same sentence. I still live here. Daniel called more often. At first, awkwardly. Then, with less hesitation. Sometimes he talked about work. Sometimes about Lily. Sometimes he said almost nothing at all, and I understood that he was learning how to speak to me again without Vanessa's voice between us. One Saturday in August, Lily came over alone. Daniel dropped her off at 10 in the morning. Vanessa did not come inside. Her car idled at the curb while Daniel walked Lily to the porch. She has a birthday party later, he said. But Lily wanted a few hours with you. Lily ran into the house before he finished. Grandma, can we make cinnamon rolls? I laughed. In August? You said Christmas isn't the only time. She remembered. That nearly undid me. We spent the morning in the kitchen, flour on the counters, cinnamon on our fingers, jazz playing softly from the old radio. While the dough rose, Lily wandered into the hallway and studied the family photos. Grandma, she said, why aren't you in many of our pictures anymore? The question was simple. That made it hurt more. I stood beside her. I suppose sometimes I was the one taking them. She frowned. But sometimes you were there. Yes, I said softly. Sometimes I was. She touched one frame from her dance recital. You're holding coats. I remember. Mommy says you like helping. I looked at the photograph. Then at Lily. I do like helping. But helping and disappearing are not the same thing. She did not fully understand. She was only 9. But something in her face softened, as if she sensed the seriousness beneath my voice. When Daniel picked her up that afternoon, he stood in the doorway longer than usual. She had a good day, he said. So did I. He looked past me toward the kitchen. It smells like when I was little. Cinnamon has a memory, I said. He smiled faintly. Then his expression changed. Mom, Vanessa and I are having a hard time. I stayed quiet. That restraint cost me something. The old me would have rushed to comfort him, excuse him, solve things for him. But I had learned that not every silence needed rescuing. I'm sorry, I said. He nodded. She thinks I'm choosing sides. Are you?
He looked at me then. No.
I think I'm finally seeing there were sides before I admitted it. That was the closest he came to saying the whole truth. It was enough for that moment. Before leaving, he asked if he and Lily could come for dinner the following week. Just you and Lily? I asked. He understood. Yes. Just us. After they drove away, I stood on the porch listening to cicadas in the trees. The evening air smelled of cut grass and warm pavement. I was not foolish enough to believe everything had healed. Some wounds do not close neatly. but I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not victory. Not revenge.
Possibility.
The following Christmas arrived quietly.
No dramática enfrentación.
No courtroom scene. No perfect apology at a candlelit table. Life rarely changes that way outside of movies. Real change happens slowly, in ordinary moments, until one day you look around and realize the atmosphere of your entire life feels different. Snow fell softly that December morning while I stood in my kitchen rolling dough for cinnamon rolls with jazz music playing through the house. The windows fogged lightly from the warmth inside, and the smell of coffee, vanilla, and cinnamon drifted through the rooms. Unlike the year before, I was not anxiously checking my phone every 10 minutes waiting for someone to confirm plans. This time, the plans belonged to me. Around noon, Carol arrived carrying homemade lasagna, while her grandson brought folding chairs in from the garage. A retired couple from down the street came an hour later with wine and pie. My old church friend Marian brought fresh flowers for the table along with a ridiculous reindeer sweater that made everybody laugh. By evening, my dining room glowed with candlelight and conversation. Not perfect conversation. Real conversation. Stories overlapping each other. People interrupting while laughing too loudly. Someone burning the dinner rolls slightly because nobody was paying attention to the oven. For the first time in years, my home did not feel staged for someone else's approval. It felt alive again. Around 6:30, headlights swept across the front yard outside. Through the window, I saw Daniel climbing slowly out of his car alone. Snowflakes settled across his dark wool coat while he stood there for a moment looking toward the house before finally walking up the driveway. The room quieted slightly when I opened the front door. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. His eyes moved past me toward the dining room where laughter still drifted through the house.
¿Tú?
He held a wrapped box awkwardly in one hand like he was not entirely sure whether he still belonged there. For a second, I saw the little boy he used to be standing outside after football practice, waiting for me to unlock the car during winter storms. "Come inside before you freeze," I told him gently. Daniel stepped into the warmth slowly while brushing snow from his shoulders. "Where is Vanessa?" Carol asked casually from the dining room, then immediately looked uncomfortable. Daniel hesitated only briefly. "She went to Aspen with friends this year," he answered quietly. Nobody responded to that.
They did not need to.
Some truths explain themselves. During dinner, Daniel remained quieter than usual, but not distant. More reflective. He listened while Marian told embarrassing stories about church bake sales and smiled when Carol's grandson accidentally spilled cranberry sauce across the tablecloth. At one point, I noticed him simply sitting back in his chair, watching the room around him with an expression I could not fully place. Maybe realization, maybe regret, maybe relief. After dessert, Lily called on video chat from Daniel's phone, wearing fuzzy pajamas and reindeer antlers while staying at Vanessa's sister's house for the weekend. "Grandma, Daddy said you made cinnamon rolls," she said immediately. "You better save me some." I laughed softly. "I already put some aside for you." Daniel watched me quietly during that conversation. For the first time in years, there was no tension sitting invisibly between us. Not because everything had healed completely. Some things never returned to what they once were. But honesty had finally entered the room where avoidance used to live. Later that night, after everyone left and the dishes were finally washed, I stood alone. Beside the Christmas tree with only the soft white lights glowing in the darkened living room. Outside, fresh snow covered the neighborhood in silence. Inside, the house still carried traces of warmth and laughter lingering gently in the air. Daniel had hugged me tightly before leaving. Longer than he used to. Not out of guilt this time. Out of understanding. Before he stepped off the porch, he turned back. "Mom," he said. "Yes. I'm sorry I let you become optional." The words landed quietly. No grand speech.
No tears.
Just one honest sentence after years of avoidance. I nodded. "I know." He looked down. "I'm trying to do better." I can see that. That was all I gave him. Not instant forgiveness. Not punishment. Just truth. After he drove away, I went back inside and locked the door. The house was quiet again. But it was not the same quiet as before. This quiet had warmth beneath it.
Memory.
Boundaries.
Dignity.
I reached down and switched off the tree lights one by one until the room settled into darkness. For the first time in many years, the darkness no longer felt lonely, because I had finally stopped begging to remain included in spaces where I was merely tolerated. And once I stopped doing that, something unexpected happened. I found people who were genuinely happy to have me there. I found my voice again. I found my home again. And most of all, I found the woman I had abandoned while trying so hard not to be abandoned by everyone else.